Thank you very much, Faye. Okay, so I have been bricking it about this talk because I'm going to be telling you a lot of stuff that's going to be quite tough to hear, and I will try and soften the blow as much as I can. Please don't throw things at me. So this is me. I do data protection, privacy, tech ethics for fun and profit, mostly fun. My background's in data protection, but I'm also a certified data ethics professional with the Open Data Institute. Get me. So the title of my talk, Don't Be a Git. Why would I even say that? Okay, for the Americans in the room, the equivalent in your language is jerk. Yeah, why would I even say that? Because you're all nice people doing a good job, trying to make the world a better place. And the reason is because I thought, if I thought you wanted to be gits, there'd be no point giving this talk at all. The fact that you're here presumably means you want to know how not to be a git. This should really say, don't be an accidental git. But that sounds really clumsy. It's not nearly as snappy. You're just people doing a hard job in an insanely complex and fast world. So, I would like to start by telling you a story from history, real history. In 1898, the Curies, Marie and Pierre, discovered radium. This funky stuff, a new element, had never been seen before. And in 1910, Marie Curie isolated radium, took it apart from all the other things that it arrived in, and it glows in the dark, shiny, brilliant, magic. And then, in a very short time, there was commercial production. Commercial production of radium for products like radium cookware, radium hand cream, radium toothpaste, radium condoms. Kind of a somewhat permanent method of birth control. Not sure that was a great idea. Now, some of these products didn't have radium in at all. It was just sales hype, but the buyers didn't know the difference. This stuff glows in the dark, it's magic, it's shiny, it's the new thing. Everybody's got to have it, everybody's got to do it. Jump on that bandwagon. And then, in the early 1920s, the stories started to hit the press from litigation. If any of you have seen the movie Radium Girls, you'll know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, check it out, it's worth it. Because it turns out that contact with radium gives people anemia and necrosis and cancer, and that's all a bit rubbish. And the business executives had known this. There was a wealth of scientific evidence available to illustrate this, but they either ignored or covered up this information because to acknowledge it would have had an adverse commercial impact. So the lawsuits were settled. There was never any precedent set in court because of this, but these cases did cause radical changes in US labor laws. And eventually, 50 or 60 or so years later, came regulation on the handling of radioactive materials in the workplace and consumer safety laws. Why am I telling you this? Because you are the equivalent today of those radium production, retail, and supply chain workers. You are the people just getting their jobs done, working with an incredibly dangerous material. And now, the downsides of that incredibly dangerous material are starting to emerge. These are all real headlines published in the last 10 years. I've chosen them from a large stash of similar stories. These are not isolated incidents, they are representative. This is a drop in the ocean. So ad tech, tracking, profiling, apart from anything else, it uses a huge amount of CO2 and water. People's vulnerabilities exploited, not intentionally. No one had their evil villain hat on going, hoo ha ha, let's take advantage of addicts. It just happened that way. Surveillance and profiling for targeted ads contributes to wealth gap, culture frictions, power differentials in political, community, workplace, and domestic contexts. This is real danger to real people, especially outgroups, especially marginalized, minoritized people, people affected by poverty. These I am very sorry to have to tell you, are the downsides effects of digital marketing technology which is used, optimized for maximum commercial return on investment without thinking about ethics. There is a wealth of academic literature supporting and analysing these effects. I do urge you to go and look for them. You're search experts. That should be a doddle, right? You should be able to find them. No, I'm just kidding. I'll put in references when I upload my slide deck. Okay, FYI, this analogy is not perfect because, well, for a start, data doesn't give you cancer. So yay. Data is also an infinite resource. It's not something that has to be yanked out of the ground, put through a smelting process involving, labs and manual labor and machinery and whatnot. Anyone with a computer can start getting into data. And data is also, the effects of data are also non-linear. So radium, it took 30, 40 years to be able to attribute the cause of these illnesses and physical symptoms to physical effects. It is much harder with data. Data is infinitely replicable. Data can travel around the world in microseconds. So it's not a perfect analogy. It's an illustration. The thing about data harms that makes them different from physical damage caused by radioactive interference with one's cells is that the causing of data harms is what's called a stochastic process. There's an element of randomness due to the amount of complexity involved. So that means we can predict what's going to happen, but we can't accurately or reliably predict when, where, to whom, and exactly how. That means that trying to target measures and limit them specifically to people identified as vulnerable is not going to work, because everybody is vulnerable in some way. It also means it's impossible to quantify risk at an individual level. Data is too fast, too big, too dynamic for tracing predictable cause and effect paths. It's really, really hard to map the pathway between choices and actions on the data design and build side to impact at an individual human level. It is, however, now possible to map those impacts at group level, and they are oppression, discrimination, exclusion, injustice. All unintended consequences of using materials and tools for narrowly specific purposes and maybe not having the time and space to think about the bigger picture. Little bit of another nugget from history for you. The dawn of commercial data mining was actually the business opportunities offered to IBM by the Third Reich. Well worth reading IBM in the Holocaust. Obviously an extreme example, but that is exactly where data protection rights come from. Never again, remember? Now, I am not calling any of you Nazis, absolutely not. I am not equating or even comparing what you do with what they did in any way. Promise. And I'm not saying technology is bad. I love technology. It's so useful. It's so clever. It's awesome. But with great power comes great responsibility. I'm telling you, data tech is dangerous. It's possibly the most dangerous technology humankind has ever come up with. And it needs to be thought about really carefully because it's so powerful and it's so complex, especially in digital marketing. Because what digital marketing is the application of technology in pursuit of psychological advantage. That's stuff that can be really useful, really helpful, really effective. But it's also kind of risky. Extra scary, it's easier to cause data harm by accident than it is to do it by purpose. All you have to do is assume that because you're good people trying to do nice things, good outcomes will result. Unfortunately, this is not the case, because it's easier to cause harm by accident than on purpose. And it's certainly easier to cause harm by accident than to avoid causing harm deliberately. Every new technology has its downsides and its dangers. We've got to learn and adapt. You know, we're human beings. We operate on FAFO. We get stuff done. And then when critical mass of external consequences forces us to rethink, we then start looking at regulation. That takes decades. Now, I'm not here to talk to you about data law. I'm here to talk to you about data ethics. That's choosing and acting to minimize harm. How can you do that if you can't attribute risk? Don't think about risk. Think about hazard. A hazard is something that will cause harm to somebody at some point unless safeguards are in place. Because people are people. We make mistakes, we do ignoble deeds, we have too much work and not enough time for thinking. There are perverse incentives that push us towards courses of actions we wouldn't necessarily choose. So there's no cure for people being people. We should not be risk assessing people being people because we cannot quantify, we can't accurately predict likelihood or where impact will land. We should be hazard spotting. There are certain technologies, tools, conditions that really need to be recognized as inherently dangerous, and they require safety controls, such as, well, trying to represent people as data. No matter how much data you collect, it can never, ever encompass the entirety of one human's experience, personality, traits, lifestyle. There's always going to be something missing. But turning people into data makes it very easy to treat people as things, to work with them en masse, to look at rows in a spreadsheet or stats on a dashboard, and forget, perhaps, that every single one of those data points is a human life. Making assumptions about people, well, that can be pretty dangerous. Don't judge a book by its cover and all that. And calling racial profiling affinity matching so that you can say hand on heart that you're not racially profiling, I mean, legally that might work, but ethically, kind of dodgy. Surveillance is known and proven to have chilling effects. Chilling effects on people's freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of conscience, effects on marginalized, minoritized outgroups. And playing guessing games at an individual level, probability is probability, it's not prophecy. There will always be outliers, edge cases, people for whom the standard rule set doesn't and shouldn't be applied. So your protective measures, your safeguards and controls have got to be layered wall to wall. And it starts with thinking and talking about ethics in regard to data. When you're designing, when you're generating or acquiring, distributing, manipulating, the key question to ask is who might be harmed? Not who at an individual level, but who in terms of populations, groups, communities. You might recognize this quote. I use this quote a lot in talks because this pretty much sums up, and again, I'm not talking about law here, but I'm going to refer to it. This pretty much sums up data protection law. If you boil the whole thing down, what it all says is give a damn and think before you act. Now, compliance is a measure. It's a measure of supposedly how close you are to achieving the effect you want. But the effect you want is not to tick compliance boxes. The effect you want is to do good business and good work while protecting human rights, human freedoms, welfare, social and democratic functions, all that good stuff. Protective measures that help you think about and adopt and implement data ethics already exist. They're in data protection law. But industry, and not just this industry, every industry, treats regulations as a game or an arms race because it gets in the way of business. That's just how humans work. So, law, ethics, and risk, these are not the same thing. Law, rules made and enforced by government authorities. They detect breaches of law and they enforce against breaches of law. Risk, cost, benefit. How much will it cost? Is it worthwhile taking the chance? Ethics, what's right and what's wrong? There are no clear-cut, one-size-fits-all answers to ethics, which make them very, very difficult to standardize and implement in business operations. Your ethics is how you interpret the law and how you prioritize risk. The examples of things that are so unethical they are in fact illegal: planting ad tech cookies on people without their knowledge and consent, spamming, secret profiling, not accepting people's no. Things that are legal, but outside the digital marketing community, there are an awful lot of people who consider them unethical: fingerprinting, cross-device tracking, differential pricing, A/B testing. But they're useful and they're mainstream, so they happen. They happen because people with good intentions and jobs to do don't have the time or the space or the incentives to think big picture. So if there's one thing you take away from my talk today, it's have conversations about data ethics, challenging conversations. Have those conversations early and often. Don't put them in the nice to have if we've got time bucket, because you will never have time. Don't let conversations about data ethics get derailed by conversations about law and risk. Law is what you may do. Risk is what you can do and whether it's worth it. Ethics is what you should do. And it may be hard to come to a consensus on what you should do, but that's okay, because as long as you're talking about it, then you are bringing it to the table. It isn't being the elephant in the room. Acknowledge that elephant. So there are no metrics for return on investment in ethics, I'm afraid. The reason for that is there aren't enough organizations doing anything with ethics enough to build a knowledge base. It would be nice to change that, wouldn't it? It would be nice to generate some measurements to demonstrate how thinking about ethics in relation to data and digital marketing is actually a great thing to do. So, if you're looking for some simple checklists because you don't have time to think about ethics, do respect a no. Be genuinely transparent. And if there's something that you don't want to tell people because you're afraid they won't like it, then maybe take that as it's worth rethinking how or what is being done. Watch out for hazards. And treat law as the floor, not the ceiling. Do avoid proprietary technologies because they're unverifiable. So I'm talking algorithms, machine learning models. If you don't understand how it works, then you can't say hand on heart that you know it's safe to use. Choose pro-privacy tools. Someone else has already done this hard work for you. Go use it. There is a whole nother talk I could give on abusive optimization and dark patterns, but stay away from it if you can. It's rude. And do discuss ethics. Don't treat it as paperwork because that completely derails the point. Don't assume that something is ethical just because everybody's doing it. There is work being done in academia and activism that is about hazards and safeguards. Go check that work out. Obviously do compliance as diligently as you can, but also consider trying to do better than what can we get away with. And don't try and quantify harms because you can't. You'll waste your time. This is an enormous subject. I haven't even begun to touch on specifics. But if you're interested in practical actions, there are people out there who can walk you through it. Thank you very much for your attention and your time.